Good afternoon, or whatever time of day it is in your part of the world. I'm Elizabeth Ann Coleman, and I'm here with some Coleman family dolls. I've done some other presentations for World Doll Day on Coleman family dolls, and you seem to have enjoyed them. So I thought I would bring out some dolls today that are related to the theme of upstairs, downstairs, with steps being the binding force in the selection of the dolls. Today I'm here with Goldie, who was a doll that belonged to my mother. She was gifted to my mother for Christmas of 1919 and was acquired at Washington, D.C.'s famous department store, Woodward and Lothrop. The doll was not one of my favorite, or one of her favorite dolls, but I was allowed to play with Goldie during my youth. To many people, Goldie is sort of iconic because she graces the cover of the First Collector's Encyclopedia of Dolls. And I'm sure you're familiar with the green, if not the white dust cover. But I thought it would be fun for you to see of the rejected dust cover for the encyclopedia. I think you can see that maybe we made the right choice in selecting the green over the yellow. I also have with me today, somewheres here, the photograph of Goldie as she was played with by my mother in her childhood home. This was her secondary home, built by my grandparents, but this is the childhood home backyard on Cathedral Avenue here in Washington, D.C. Now, Goldie was brought down from the attic, more steps, in this house for me to play with in 1949. And it apparently was during a time that my younger sister, Evelyn Jane, was asleep. And when Jane woke up, she wanted to know why she couldn't have a big dolly, too. My mother said she thought Jane was a little young at age 4 to have a big dolly like this. And so the next record is a year later, almost to the day, and Goldie comes down, and she's out here with myself and another little friend when Goldie encounters an accident. And it's right on these very steps that Goldie lost her finger. And my mother wrote in her diary that Goldie made an abrupt move back upstairs to the attic where she was going to live for a nice long time because I had done the damage to the doll. But I consider it a battle wound of honor, and somewheres in this surrounding area there lies the finger of Goldie. We never did find it. We looked long and hard for it, but it was not to appear. So that's the story of Goldie and the steps. She tumbled off the steps here. So I hope you've enjoyed that little introduction to one of the dolls in the Coleman family history.
And you are in for a very rare treat bestowed upon very few people. We are going to visit the Coleman attic of the home that was built in the late 30s, early 40s by Ann Coleman's grandfather. And who do I find waiting for us in the attic? Miss Coleman.
Welcome, Kathy Turner, my official photographer, to the Coleman attic. Yes, it is as chaotic as it looks, but hopefully there is a treasure or two here that relates to the topic of upstairs, downstairs. I'd like to introduce you to another piece of architecture that started out life here in Washington, D.C. And like Goldie, who you met earlier, this is a doll's house that was purchased for my mother in 1914. It was a model that was sold by Woodward and Lothrop, and my grandfather was in construction, and my mother, who was a small child then, asked why he built houses for other people, but he didn't ever give her a doll's house to play with. This is a Morse Gottschalk house from Germany, and I have a catalog from, of all things, a British toy distributor of this model before my grandfather painted it up for my use and my sister's use. This is the model of the doll's house, and you can see what lovely trim it had before he put on the aluminum paint, but I'll explain why the aluminum paint went on later on. But this dollhouse does not have usual internal steps. It has external steps. And as you'll see, the risers and the platforms of the steps are very narrow, and it's impossible to have your dolls stand on stands to walk up the steps. They have to put their little feet on the steps. And this is a tray of my mother's doll's house dolls, and we'll look at them inside in just a moment. So let me put this up, and then we'll put the family in the house. We're going to have to pretend that they're looking at it as potential real estate. The house has a few furnishings in it, but not many items. So here we have the Simon and Helbig set of dolls that she got at the same time as she got the house. They were dressed by herself and her mother, my grandmother, and they included grandfather. I'm going to put these over here, Kathy. Grandmother, now in her very, very frail silk dress. Father, who for some reason has had his feet broken off. I don't know whether they expected him to run away without paying up. The mother, and the two children, who are in, since this is week we're filming is Thanksgiving week, very appropriately dressed in pilgrim attire. And again, these were dressed by my mother and my grandmother. But that was the set of 6. Then the doll's house had another little pilgrim girl and her sister. So this was a well-populated house. And then 2 Hertwig children, the boy. And I can only assume that these pilgrim people were for a dining room table decoration late in her childhood. And then the last doll that I have a record coming to live in the house was the chef, who I plead guilty, I lost his toque. Never give me anything to play with. So those are the doll's house dolls that go into this house. And actually we'll just put a few of them into the house. so that you can see the proportion of the dolls to the house. And if I tell you that the house has furnishings from my mother's generation and from my own generation, you'll just have to believe me, because it really does. This was the living room, this was the kitchen, this was the dining room, and this was a bedroom, and then for the children there was this upstairs room that they could play in. So we'll go back to the seasonal activities of this doll's house, because when my sister and I began to become interested in the dollhouse in the late 1940s, early 1950s, it made an annual pilgrimage down the attic stairs that you came up, thanks to Kathy Turner, and went into my grandmother's bedroom, and my sister and I played with it in that bedroom for several months. And we even have documentation that my sister was visited by her doctor while she had chicken pox, and the doctor actually played with the dolls in the doll's house. This is all thanks to my mother's very copious and remarkably interesting diary annotations, which she was very good about keeping, about my sister and I and our playthings. So that's the doll's house that served 2 generations of Coleman children. Well, as you might imagine, this house saw many dolls come in through the front door and climb the stairs. There was an occasion where my grandfather, when we were in Europe, very kindly made a contribution of $5 to Jane and myself, each one of us getting $5 to spend towards the purchase of a doll when we took our grand tour to the continent. And he very kindly said, "This is your own money. We have sent the same amount to Anne to spend any way she wishes." I got a doll. You don't see her here today, but I thought you should be reacquainted with a doll that you've encountered before, Smelly Feet, which my sister spent her $5 on in the flea market in Paris. This became her play doll, and every night as a child of, excuse me while I'm not having visitors coming, I hope. It's my eyes, not my nose, that's itching. Every night she would go upstairs with Smelly Feet to bed. He's a wooden-headed doll, so you can imagine that he was not the most comfortable thing for a young child. She was, in 1954, she would have been 8.5, 9 years old. She also, on that trip to the continent, got a Swiss wooden doll, which she named, I've never completely understood why, Elizabeth. And I don't know whether she never revealed whether it was after me, whether she saw something evil in me, which she probably did, like all sisters. But Elizabeth was the companion to Smelly Feet, spent many, many happy hours in bed with her. And you can imagine rolling over on an old wooden doll. Smelly Feet at least has a pliable body. And we have pictures of her with Smelly Feet taken in 1959. Shows how much he still meant to her as a child. And we have a photograph of Jane with Elizabeth taken in 1956 when Elizabeth was still fairly new in life. Elizabeth had clothes because she was acquired while we were still living abroad from both Switzerland, the UK, and the US in her wardrobe. So she was an international dresser, and I have located the business card of the shop in Switzerland that we got Elizabeth at. And I think I even know how much we spent on Elizabeth, because Jane spent her grandparents' money on Smelly Feet. So, those are two dolls that happily climbed these stairs. I cannot tell you how many evenings, nights in the life of Evelyn Jane Coleman to go to bed with her, and her array of stuffed animals. It was never quite obvious whether she liked the stuffed animals more than she liked the dolls, but she had this proclivity for liking wooden dolls at a very early age. Nothing plastic, nothing vinyl, that was wood that she was interested in. So now let's get to me and what I might have had under the Christmas tree. In 1950, I was blessed with Tiny Tears. And this is my picture with Tiny Tears and one of Jane's infamous stuffed animals, which you can see was almost as large as she was. She had a fixation on red, and she asked for a red elephant for Christmas. And my mother had a time until she found out about the Republican National Party, and they were selling red elephants. So anyway, to get back to my Tiny Tears, I wrote on December 26th, I was a very good correspondent of 1950. Dear Mother, thank you for Tiny Tears. I love Tiny Tears. I want to take Tiny Tears to Aunt Ev's. I love you, Mother. Love, Elizabeth Ann. And the crossed the pond correspondence that I have includes a letter from family friends in Cornwall, and we'll talk about Cornwall in a few minutes with some other dolls on the steps, in which they remark about receiving this picture of Jane and myself with Tiny Tears and Jane with her red elephant. Or red and white elephant, I should say, Jenny. So, dolls on the stairs. I thought I might share with you dolls that we collected while we were living outside of the United States between 1953 and 1955. And some of the first dolls to be acquired when we were living in England were Christmas presents, because we went over in the late summer and Christmas was soon upon us. And my mother, being ever so prepared in her usual manner, started buying Christmas presents for my sister and myself fairly early on in the season. She went into Hamley's, as she writes, in October, and she talks about buying Henry VIII and 2 wives, which she was going to give to me. I was to get, as I say, Henry by Ilse and Richard Ottenberg, and Jane Seymour, and Catherine Howard. Now, I got them for Christmas, more than delighted at their arrival, and I wrote to my grandparents very promptly to thank them for their contribution to the acquisition. Quote, "I also want to thank you for Catherine Howard. She is a humdinger." Now I'm age 11 at this point. "She is dressed in a violet frock and has red hair. I also got her husband himself, Henry VIII. He is holding his tummy! Exclamation point. And looking very grand. To take his eye off Catherine, Mother got Jane Seymour. Jane is dressed in dark blue with gold trimming, and she has golden hair." I think a very good description for a young 11-year-old. But having two of Henry's wives really did not satisfy me. I wanted them all. And so I started my campaign to get them all. And in April of 1954, I tried a mathematical tact to see if I could coerce my grandparents into financing the acquisition of more of Henry's wives. And this was my reasoning. I start out by saying that the poor old boy has only 4 wives, and every time he hears that we have been to Hamley's and not gotten him another wife, he could chop off our heads. He only needs 2 more wives. The wives are only 63 shillings each. At Hamley's, they have Queen Elizabeth II, and she cost £25, which was equal to $75, and Henry's wives are equal to $9. You could get Henry and all 6 of his wives and start all over again with another Henry and 1 more wife to make up the amount which the Queen costs. I am trying to save my money for them. Contributions are received thankfully in bold capital. If any contribution sent out on next post, thank you." And I continued my wheedling for several other letters over the summer, never realizing that my mother had already acquired the rest of the bridal party, if you will, of Henry VIII. And I will say that this group of dolls spurred me on while I was in college to write a paper on Holbein portraits of the families related to these wives. And the comment of the professor was that the paper was good enough for a master's dissertation. So I was always quite proud of that these dolls had started off something that had really turned out to be a very special moment in my life. So I hope you enjoy looking at them. And to show you, this is the front of the bed and breakfast where we stayed at in Foy, Cornwall, England. And these dolls ran up and down these stairs on many occasions to come outside, have their pictures taken. This is a picture taken of the first Christmas time with Henry, Jane Seymour, and Catherine Howard. And so it's a little bit of English history as related to the Coleman family collection. And thank you very much for listening to another bit of trivia from the Coleman collection.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button.